Okay. My name is Helene Isaacs, and I'm co-chair of the Arts and Cultural Affairs Committee along with Lynn Ross. And this is one in a series of Zoom programs that we're having over the summer. And as I said earlier, it's really a treat to be able to learn more about our congregants, find out about their hobbies, their passions, and their talents. And we're delighted that so many people have been attending these Zoom programs. So I just want to thank Lynn for all her hard work, Michelle for her willingness to do this, Melissa Hager is going to be moderating, and Joel Berger for all of his behind the scenes assistance, and Heidi Joseph as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Melissa, to introduce Michelle.
Okay, hi. First of all, if anybody doesn't know me, Melissa Hager. I want to introduce Michelle, and during this talk, if you have any questions, put it in the chat, and we're going to try and get to your questions as she is going through her talk. We're going to try and do that, and if I don't see it and I'm a little distracted looking at other things, we'll get to the questions at the end. So be patient, because it looks like this is a pretty large group. Our presenter is Michelle Alperin, who many of you know. She lives in Princeton, New Jersey. And I don't know if somebody mentioned West Windsor. I'm in West Windsor, I'm not in Princeton, although, see, you should come to our side of Route 1, look what it looks like. So she's a journalist who copy edits and provides B'nai Mitzvah tutoring. She's married to Steve Sheriff, who I think is on here somewhere. The mother of 2 children, Jacob and Eliza, and is the proud grandmother to Nava and Hannah. Michelle has been a member of the Jewish Center for about 30 years. Because Michelle always admired orchids, about 5 or 6 years ago, she pitched an idea to the Princeton magazine about a Pennington orchid grower and seller named Susan Gange. And to her surprise, they said, go do that story. So she did. And after her interview with Susan, using the money that she would have earned and did earn, but she used it for the buying orchids, she came home with 2 orchids and a lot of advice from Susan. And after the 2 orchids, she got interested in growing and collecting, and now owns 109 orchids. Wow. But she tells me there are only 9 or 10 of them in bloom at any time, depending on the season. And Michelle says that the orchids challenge her to learn, to think creatively, and to overcome her penchant for perfectionism, at least in small ways. So as you were talking before, Michelle is hobby-ridden, and she admits that she is an avid quilter, knitter, crocheter, and gardener, and is looking forward to sliding into, at some point, a very happy, busy, and contented retirement. So we are so lucky to have Michelle here today to tell us all about orchids, and it's really nice to have an expert in our community. So please, let's give a muted welcome to Michelle as she presents her presentation, which I have renamed To Every Season. So welcome, Michelle. You can start.
Yeah, I'm gonna find the
oh, you want to share your screen?
The PowerPoint. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so first of all, I'm not an expert, although I have absorbed a lot of information over the last 5 or 6 years, and you'll get a sense of where I kind of gained some of my knowledge. So I wanted to start. Oh, the other thing was, I don't know if I'd call orchids a passion, or really I would say orchids are an obsession, because otherwise, why would I have so many? So, so what is an orchid? An orchid, orchids, I didn't look up the number of them, but they're like, I don't know, maybe 30,000 or more than that varieties. They exist all over the world. all kinds of environments, you know, high latitudes, low latitude, I mean, yeah, and different altitudes. So, and what, you know, what really defines them are that the sepals, which are initially part of the bud, are part of the flower in an orchid. And they also have this like lip that sticks out that you probably recognize. And more detailed things I don't know, but anyway, so, wait a minute. How do I move to another screen? Down. I'm doing down. Enter. What? Enter? No. All right, wait a minute. Okay, there, I had to click the screen. Okay, so just to start with, you know, a friend of Elise's was on Zoom with her a couple weeks ago, and she said something that I think is very typical of people. She said, "Oh yeah, I had an orchid, and then it died. Like, but it didn't die. What happened was the flowers were done. You know, just like tulips, azaleas, daylilies, orchids have a natural cycle. I mean, some bloom more than once a year, but many of them bloom once a year. So you have to wait till the next season. So there's a lot of patience and waiting in growing orchids because you don't have immediate reinforcement of all the work that you do. Because what happens is, oops, how do I go backwards? Well, whatever. What happens is the orchid, oh, okay. The orchids kind of start, the flowers when they're done, they kind of start like folding up and then they dry up and then they fall off. But that doesn't mean that anything is wrong with your plant. So next year, it blossoms again. As long as, wait a minute, hold on. No, this is not, wait a minute. It's not on my, okay. All right, it wasn't me. All right. Anyway, so wait, I just wanna, wait, how do I get rid of the, there, okay. All right, so if you treat your orchid well, it will very likely blossom again. Although wait a minute, oh, wait a minute, I'm having trouble with, yeah, no, it's, wait, hold on 1 second. Why is it doing that?
Why is it doing what? You need to go over here, hit that.
Oh, that, okay.
And now if you want to go back, you hit up.
Okay, all right. All right. Okay, sorry. So, treating it well may involve when you if you have a grocery store orchid and the flowers fall off, you have to kind of feel around in the medium that it's growing in. Sometimes the media from the grocery store are too moist and stay moist for so long that they will kill the roots and ultimately the plant. My friend Mickey gave me an orchid like 3 years ago that I kept alive for like 3 years and it fell over. But the problem was we had stayed at her house watching her dog while she was away, and our house was being renovated. And there was this beautiful, beautiful purple orchid there, and it was soaking wet. And it was soaking wet when we got there, and it was soaking wet when we left, and it was soaking wet when she gave it to me. So I repotted it when I brought it home, but it just never made it. But I always keep orchids until the last leaf is left of like, well, there's a sign of life, you know? So the other thing you have to do for an orchid is to water it thoroughly until the top inch is dry. And I used to go around feeling in my orchids, feeling the top inch, but with 109, you can't do that. So instead, I have like a schedule of like which orchids where in the house need watering at a particular time. And when you water orchids, what I do is I put I make a very weak solution of fertilizer. So first I water the plant with real water, just plain water, actually not plain water. So I put orchids in big, like old milk jugs. And because the chlorine is supposed to like go out in the air, and Susan, my original mentor, told me it was better for orchids to use water like that. So anyway, so you first you water it thoroughly. No. First you water it thoroughly, and then once a month First you water it thoroughly, then you water it with the fertilizer solution, but you do that basically 3 times a month, and then once a month you flush it out with water because the fertilizer salts can, I don't know, damage the orchid. And you also have to give it the right amount of light. And as you'll see soon, and kind of orchids in my house are placed in different windows because they have different amounts of light that they need. And some of them are under artificial lights because they need more light than the sun can bring into the house. So if you kind of do all these things, your orchid will bloom again, eventually. So, okay, so I'm just wanted to show you some of the orchids that are in bloom in my house now. So Phalaenopsis are I guess they're the variety people are most familiar with kind of the big leaves that kind of flow over. So this one has been in bloom for really a long time, like weeks, and still looks pretty good. This one also has been in bloom for a long time, but I don't know if you can tell from the picture, but it's kind of starting to fade a little bit. These are sort of definitely starting to fade, or they really never had like enough flowers, probably because they're not big enough. As the plants get bigger and stronger, usually you get more and more flowers. So these are more Phalaenopsis. So these are Dendrobiums, and actually, when I got these, like one morning I went, there was someone had died, and there was a kind of a greenhouse that was full of the orchids. I guess he sold some of the orchids and grew some of the orchids. And so I went there and I bought like a whole bunch of them. Well, a lot of them died, and because of me, I'm sure, not because of him, but this is one example. It's like an Australian Dendrobium. And the picture on the right is of an orchid that's like about to bloom. You see how the orchid blooms out of the place at the top, and it could even have, this one has kind of tiny blossoms, but this one could have bigger blossoms. I'm not sure. And one of the surprises about orchids is you can look up, if you remembered to keep the tag, you can look up the orchid and get an idea of what it's going to look like. But a lot of times you forget or you don't look it up, and then you're surprised every time. So these are Cattleyas, which
Michelle,
yeah.
before we move on, there's a question.
Yeah.
Can you describe the difference between the Phalaenopsis and the Dendrobium? Is there a real difference between them?
I mean, wait, let me, hold on a second.
You're not able to.
What? So the Dendrobiums have these, they're called rhizomes, and so they have a few, can you see this?
No.
Yes, no?
There's a, no, not really.
Oh, all right.
You can explain it.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, so they're, and there are a few leaves at the top of these rhizomes, and then the flowers are, the ones that I've had, the flowers like grow, there's like a kind of a long skinny thing that kind of opens up, and then the flowers grow off of that. So the flowers are sort of at the top. For Phalaenopsis, they have, you know, they have much bigger leaves. The spike that the orchid comes off of starts at the bottom of the leaves and goes up. Yeah, that's kind of generally. The cattleyas to me are the more like kind of exquisite orchids, although sometimes they're just like go away in a flash. I mean, they don't last very long, but you see in these that they're I don't know, they're just, to me, they're just beautiful. The colors and the mix of colors. So yeah. Now this is a kind of a strange orchid called a Psychopsis. And so I ended up somehow with two of these plants, and the flowers look pretty much the same. This is both from the same plant, but I wanted you to get a close-up of what the flower looked like, because it's pretty unusual. The lip is kind of gigantic, and then some of the, whatever we call these petal sepals, they're you know, long and skinny. So but it's still an orchid. But what was interesting is in most orchids, or at least in Phalaenopsis for sure, in most orchids, when a flower is done, you cut off the spike near the bottom, and another spike will grow in another year. But luckily, I was warned at the Orchid Society, like, not to touch this spike. So I waited a long time before this ever bloomed. My other one like bloomed and kept blooming once there was a spike, but this one, if you notice here, the first part of the spike kind of up to here is like really skinny. And then like suddenly, like pretty quickly, it put off more of a spike and it was really more robust. And then after that happened, it started to bloom. So it's kind of interesting to watch and try to figure out what orchids are doing.
So Michelle, we have a few more questions. Well, two of them are related. What makes a flower an orchid, and do all orchids have 5 leaves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I didn't understand the first question.
What makes a flower an orchid? Is there some defining thing about an orchid or a flower that you would characterize?
Right. Well, I think I
orchid?
tried to show that at the beginning. I'm sure there are many more things that define it, but you have basically you have the sort of the petals, and then you have the sepals, and but they all form a flower, which doesn't happen in your regular flower. So, and they have that lip. Sometimes some of the parts of the orchid are fused together, so they don't look like they have 5 parts, but they kind of do, because they have those parts, but they have become fused, so they look very different. Some of them have like a gigantic lip, like the lady slipper orchids, the Paphiopedilums. So yeah, is that clear?
I think that goes into that. And do they always have 5 flowers?
5
or leaves?
5
Leaves.
I mean, I think they have those same parts. Yeah, I think so. As I said, they have them, but they sometimes, in some orchids, they're fused together.
Okay.
I think so.
And this is just a random question.
Yeah.
When did they become popular prom corsages?
Oh, I have no idea. But I think the ones that used to be used for corsages are the really big cattleyas that are like they're very, very showy, you know, and colorful, and yeah. So all right. So in my house, when we renovated, I had the orchids in mind, so made sure there were plenty of like big windows and windowsills, although I think my architect would have done that automatically. So, so the east-facing windows are good for the Phalaenopsis, and also the Psychopsis work well there. So there are a lot of small ones here. A lot of those are ones that I like picked up that people gave me or whatever. And, you know, some do well and some like just eventually die, but you know, you do your best. But
So there's a question here, sort of related to what you're talking about. And I've heard this too, that people say to put ice cubes on your Phalaenopsis every week, and that's how you should water them. Can you address that?
you know, I'm not sure. I mean, I think in general, what people recommend is really thoroughly watering them, you know, with water. But I was looking because I knew there'd be a question about this, and there was an article about I think some kind of experiment or research that said that they really weren't so bad. It wasn't so bad because it keeps you from overwatering your orchids. But I had also heard that the cold, you know, they're tropical plants, so that the cold of the ice could kind of inhibit blooming. So I'm not really sure.
And then one last question before I get, there was a comment or a question about the little clip that you use. Is there a special name for that clip that you use on orchids?
Yeah, I don't know. But if you go to somebody who sells orchids, or a site that sells orchids in orchid materials online, you can usually buy the clips. But I wanted to say, I discovered something which I was going to say later, but I'll say it now. So this is what the clips look like. Can you see it?
No.
No?
People, if you go to speaker view, you might be able to see Michelle bigger.
Yeah. So anyway, it turns out that they have these like little stick things here, and there's like a metal thing here. And I'm not thinking like, so basically if this is you have a stick that holds up the spike so it doesn't like keel over. So basically you have to do this around the back of the stick so that the parts that are pointy are on the stick and not on your orchid spike, because this year I happened to put it on an orchid spike and it like ruined the spike, and it like, I had to cut it off. So yeah. Okay, so we have east facing windows for the phals. West windows is good for the Paphiopedilums, which, yeah, I'll show you that they'll come up later again. And Oncidiums here, they're the ones that have a very, very long spike with like lots of smaller flowers on them. And you see here that this is one of the plant lights that I have, and it's better than my other one because you can raise and lower the light. So finally I was able to fit the orchids that had gotten really tall and really big, rather than trying to put them around the edges of the light. I could put them right under the light. So that was good. So, and then Cattleyas go in the south windows, but I have them all under the lights. And those are not orchids. Those are African violets that I experimented with putting kind of under the lights. That didn't work because the leaves got yellow around the edges. So now I'm trying to move them like away, but so they still get some of that light. And they bloom, because I've had African violets forever, and they haven't always bloomed. So, and this. These are mostly the dendrobiums, and you'll see the jugs here, and then you see like I put so there's like no great place to put it because you need a lot of water, so it's like lined up on the counter here, and I keep towels over it because if you don't, the sun will you know, create algae. So it's, yeah, and then you have to throw them away. And I have these vandas outdoors. You can put a lot of orchids outdoors, but you have to, And a lot of times you don't have the right places to put them because there's too much sun, and if you just stick them out in the sun, they'll get sunburn. But these are hanging in a tree. These are Vandas. They have these bare roots that hang out, so they need to be sprayed. I'm sure more than I do. I try to spray them a couple times a day, but if you go into an arboretum and you go into a room where Vandas are, it's like there's steam coming up from the ground, and the roots are like, you know, 2 or 3 feet long hanging down. So
that goes to a question about which windows should you put your different orchids in, and how do you know?
what should you put them in?
Which window? What light should you be giving them?
Okay, so that'll come up later too, but you do have to do a lot of reading if you're going to get different kinds of orchids. The American Orchid Society is an amazing site. They have kind of basic culture sheets for that are available, you know, for people to look at and read about, you know, the light and whatever. And then they have, I discovered recently that they have these greenhouse chats where the guy is incredibly knowledgeable and people ask questions, and they have like indexes so you can find where you go on these chats to find out an answer to something that you want about, like particularly if something seems to be wrong with your orchid and you want to figure out like what it is and how to fix it. But they have, I was listening to a video that I found there on different potting media that you can use and why. So yeah, so I think they're probably the best source of information. You know, you have to ask questions. Coming to the Central Jersey Orchid Society, I've learned a huge amount. There are people that are far more knowledgeable than me there who even know the names of so many orchids, and they're so complicated, and that's just like not something that my brain tolerates. So anyway, yeah, and sometimes you can just put in the name of the orchid online and find out information about it. But yeah, so you do have to do research basically, and you have to learn a lot of basics. But you know, the thing to do is really to start with one kind of orchid and learn what that type of orchid needs, and then you can move on to other ones. It's good to probably start with one whose light requirements match where you have windows in your house too. So, okay, so whose house is this anyway? So Adel, our poodle, thinks it's hers, but Stephen and Eliza know the truth. This house is maintained for the benefit of the orchids. Like, I don't really believe that, but they do, so. All right, so the basics. Orchids need light and, whoops. So grow lights are a big help. They're a little pricey, but they, especially for cattleyas, they're almost a necessity. Appropriate temperatures. Usually orchids can tolerate a range of temperatures. Cattleyas need to have it cooler at night in the winter to encourage flowering. But I think mine, it gets cool enough in here since they're near the windows, I think, because they've been blooming. But one thing that's interesting is, and I'll show you, I can show you that a little later too, but the way cattleyas grow, when they're small, they don't bloom. So I thought I was doing something wrong, but I wasn't really. It just, a lot of orchids have to, mature to really bloom beautifully. Now whoop, wait a minute, yeah. Wait a minute. Yeah. Yeah, okay. What? Okay. Yeah, it's fine. That's fine. All right, so the growing medium, right now I've been using the mix of fir bark, charcoal, and sponge rock that a lot of like orchid nurseries sell. Although I think that I switched to that because the medium that Susan had seemed to be too water retentive for the inside of my house, and a lot of the roots were dying. But then when I switched to this, I think I didn't water enough because in the beginning when you repot and you have like fir bark and stuff that doesn't hold water that well, it takes a while before it does hold more water and before the orchid is settled in it. So I have some droopy leaves, so I need to really mark the pots when I repot so that I'm careful to water them more often. Also, orchids need humidity, so I have humidity trays, which are they have a you put water in the bottom, and the orchids sit on a, what do you call that?
Grill.
Like a grid, whatever. Grill, yeah. And they also need air movement. So I think I have almost enough fans now. I may need another one, but so I always save Bed Bath & Beyond coupons, and it was very hard buying a fan in the winter. So if you foresee a need for fans, you should buy them now. Okay. What?
You're gonna have a much easier
What?
time if you get back in display
Oh,
mode.
yeah. Oh, I see. Okay. Sorry.
But I can't
Okay.
tell you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Some orchids have unusual needs, like winter nights in the refrigerator. So these orchids called nobile orchids. So I had this thing, and like nothing was happening, no blooms. It may not be big enough, but I learned at an Orchid Society meeting that it requires like seriously cooler temperatures in the winter. Somebody was saying that a person would take these orchids like up 3,000 feet of higher altitude, somebody like who lived out west, where they would definitely be colder, and then go get them like 6 weeks later. So anyway, but they said that a refrigerator works too, so I'll be trying that. All right, so yeah, as I said, I think that I described this already, where you can learn more about orchids. Okay, mistakes. So when you make mistakes, you need to learn from them and move on. So one thing is just carelessness. Although the leaves in orchids are pretty sturdy, the bigger leaves, and I think the flowers are even reasonably sturdy. But if you have new growth or a small root, it's easy to knock it off if you're careless, or if you're trying to repot and you're not really watching out. As I said, another issue is not watering enough after you repot orchids.
And Michelle, there's a question about whether or not they can get too old to bloom.
Then they, I don't know. I haven't had them long enough for that to happen. I mean, I think they can, I don't know what the duration of their bloom time is. I don't know. So there are two like really bad offenses against orchids. The first is watering too much, because too much water kills the roots, and without roots, the orchid will die. Another is getting water in the crown, which is the top leaves of a phalaenopsis, because they get something called crown rot, which is also a death sentence. Like I came back from vacation once, and I think the person who was watering for me just forgot what I told her about the crowns, or I didn't know about it yet, or whatever. Anyway, and the leaves started turning yellow, and just one by one they would just fall off really fast, and there wasn't supposedly like cinnamon can help, but like I tried that, it didn't really work. Another mistake I've made is when I have these really big blossoms and I didn't put a strong enough spike there and they kind of like fell off. I think the spike maybe like broke, or so you have to be careful about that. Okay, all right, so here's another, like, not a huge error, but when I was repotting this this Cattleya orchid, I had heard that you have to have like at least 3 of the the leaves, the rhizomes, in order for the plant to continue to grow successfully. And the way I interpreted that was that this plant like had a lot of rhizomes. It was a big plant, so I kind of cut it apart into groups of 3. So, which I didn't really need to do. I could have just put them all in a bigger pot, which is nice because then they have more, you have more blooms at the same time and it looks really nice. So the other thing that happened with these was they got these like little indentations on the leaves. So I kind of left them, I sprayed them with something called Physan, which is like an antifungal, antibactericide. So I don't know if that stopped whatever was wrong, but I also finally, I just cut off all the leaves that had those indentations. So I'm kind of waiting to see whether these will all come back and do well. So
before you go on to the hints, somebody was asking about buying orchids and if it matters if you buy inexpensive ones or more expensive ones, and if you go to Trader Joe's, are the smaller ones just small, a different variety, or are they going to get bigger?
Yeah, so I was going to say that later. I mean, I think sometimes I mean, you probably don't get your best specimens, although sometimes people buy them there and they raise them and they're eventually incredibly beautiful plants. So I have another slide that sort of suggests places to get orchids, but certainly you can try supermarket orchids. Whoops, but they might be, they might have been kind of pressed to bloom really quickly and not. They may not have had the same kind of care you'd get it from an orchid that was grown in a nursery. But I'm not really sure, so I wouldn't totally depend on what I say. But certainly, people sometimes have success with them. I think I've had some that I've not had success with, but that could happen from an orchid you buy anywhere. So, all right, so hints. So sometimes Phalaenopsis leaves will get kind of out of alignment. They don't have that nice kind of one leaf on one side and one leaf on the other side. So you can use a little masking tape to for a couple of days to try to straighten out the leaves. When you have orchids in a window, you want keep them facing in the same direction, the same way, because that's the orchid. Well, all of them, the orchids will. Whoops. The orchids will have I think a prettier they're supposed to kind of land better, so they're not all facing different ways. They're all kind of going the same way. You're supposed to water early in the morning to avoid rot and giving them plenty of time to dry. I think in the summer it's a little easier because they dry more quickly, but and you don't always have time to water them all early in the day. Another thing is to keep the little plastic stick that comes in them that tells you what they are, because it's useful to know what they are, which I didn't really realize in the beginning. And also it's good you can record in pencil on them your repotting dates. Some ink from pens runs, but pencil is more stable. You need to keep an eye out for diseases or bugs. And you should isolate new plants as well as any plants that show signs of a disease, so it doesn't spread throughout your collection. Okay, here are mealybugs, which are really common, and I've had times where they're just like all over the place. So they look like little cotton things. They look big here, but they're not. They're like little kind of tiny bugs, but you can also get out a magnifying glass and you can be pretty sure if it's mealybugs, but the faster you get to them, the better success you'll have. So first you kind of pick them off with a Q-tip dipped in alcohol, they kind of disintegrate under that. Then this pesticide, the systemic houseplant insect control, is like little pellets, and you sprinkle that in the kind of indicated amount on top of your media that it's growing in. And there's a third thing. So there's a combination of Dr. Bronner's soap and isopropyl alcohol and water. You put it into a spray bottle and you spray the orchid for 3 weeks in a row, and kind of all those things together usually get rid of the mealybugs, but you have to like keep an eye out. And this concoction is also useful. I've used it for other things, other kinds of insect damage or possible insect infestation. And it seems to be helpful for those too. Okay, so what keeps me going with orchids? So one thing orchids teach you is to observe things carefully, which is not really something I'm known for doing. I'm kind of I'd say a visual space cadet in a way. Orchids also teach you to try new things and accept failure along the way, which is something I'm terrible at because I like to be perfect. Bar bat mitzvah tutoring kind of taught me that too, though, because it's hard to expect perfection from 12-year-olds. But orchids also kind of teach patience, although in a way the reward is beauty. And it's really fun to watch them change over time. So one thing that is interesting is like wondering whether orchids are going to make it. So these are both Cattleya type orchids. And they've got really dried out. I don't know if that's because I didn't water them enough. I'm guessing they maybe came that way because you see how these dried, the rhizomes they're not happy. They ought to be like kind of puffed out and full. But right here, there's like another one coming up, and although it seems a little dry too, but it has very good roots, these thick white roots. So I'm hoping that like maybe from here on we'll have a rebirth. And this one, the leaves are like a mottled mess, and I don't know if they're sick or, and again, they're like here and here, there are two coming up that look healthy, two new growths that look healthy, so I'm hopeful. So in here, another thing is just when you see a plant that looks like really healthy, and can you see like in this, this sort of seed pod thing here, you can see this dark shadow. That's the plant kind of the flower sort of growing up, and when it gets big enough, it'll kind of burst open the pod and you'll have a flower, but you don't necessarily know what it's going to look like. But anyway, it's fun.
So Michelle, there's a question. If you see a damaged leaf, is it better to cut it out or leave it?
Well, I think it depends on the damage. You certainly don't want to cut out the top leaves because it'll stop growing. I mean, a lot of times if there's like brown along the edges, you can just take a razor blade and cut it and cut that off. Again, I tried to cut because there were all those indentations and I couldn't figure out what they were. And on those orchids that I showed you, I just waited until the plant seemed to have enough growth on it that didn't have those on it, and then I just cut them off near the bottom because they just didn't look healthy. So I don't know. It just kind of depends what the issue is. So I mean, I cut actually a few orchids like looked like really sick, like a lot of the leaves looked sick. So I just like they were Paphilopetalums where they grow in kind of, you have what looks like one little plant with kind of fanned leaves, and then it gets a blossom, and when a blossom is done, then other fans grow up, and some of them look terrible. So I just cut them out and left enough to kind of keep growing. So like it's an experiment. It really is an experiment. You have to just try things, which is why it's good to have a lot of them. Then if you lose some, you feel relief because you don't have to water them anymore. Anyway, now this is like an amazing thing that happened recently. So you see up here at the top, these like kind of misshapen leaves, like 2 in a row were misshapen, all right? So you think, well, there's like, this is a Phalaenopsis. There must be something like really wrong with this plant, okay? Then I noticed kind of under the leaves, like 2 different things. So first, can you see right here? This is called a keiki. It's like a new plant. So this plant is saying, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I'm going to grow a new plant just in case I don't make it. So that new plant can take over for the old plant. But then the plant also sent up a spike, and I love these flowers. So I thought, well, maybe I should cut it off to give like the more strength to the leaves, but I decided to leave it because I love this orchid. So, so I don't know. Time will tell what happens. You know, and it's fun to just watch orchids grow and see the new growth. So the Cattleyas I was telling you about. Now, here, do you see here? So you see how they get bigger? They're little and then bigger and then bigger. And once it's bigger, I have a blossom here. But it looked like it was gonna blossom down here in this one. And I was watching it, nothing happened. And it turns out that you can have the seed pod, but the plant's just not strong enough at that level to put out a blossom. So, and this I was telling you about the Paphilopetalums. This is how they grow. So I'm, you know, and so then you're kind of just waiting for a spike to come up, and sometimes it takes a long time. And then the Phalaenopsis put out these like little leaves that get bigger and bigger and bigger. So you're always looking for a new leaf, and then you're also always looking at the roots of these plants. Sometimes a plant like looks kind of like weak, but then you see that some really strong roots are growing in the bottom. So you figure it'll probably be okay. But the roots are really the most important thing. Okay. So in terms of getting new orchids, you can buy from a kind of a reputed greenhouse. I mean, Waldor Orchids is south of Atlantic City. It may be the closest one. Or you can buy at an orchid show because they all come and sell at the orchid show, or online. A lot of the sellers sell orchids through eBay. I haven't done that, but I've been kind of curious about it. So there are a lot of orchid shows that are within maybe 45 minutes of here that usually take place kind of January to April, usually. Sometimes sometimes orchid societies have auctions, so you can go and you can buy a plant for a little bit less money at an auction. You can go to the Central Jersey Orchid Society meetings and win the monthly raffle, which, I don't know, they have enough orchids so that you win fairly often. Or you get gifts from friends who don't know what to do with an orchid or say I don't have a green thumb, but it really just takes a little knowledge. And you can always call me and ask me if you have a question, if you're trying to get started. So supplies. So this fertilizer from Michigan State University is supposed to be good for just regular, growing of, roots and leaves and blooms. But I had been using this other orchid to encourage blooms when it looks like an orchid is about to bloom. Razor blades are important, or are there a way to make sure you have a sterile cutting tool? Like when you're repotting orchids, you cut off the old roots and you cut off spikes, and as we said, sometimes you cut off part of a leaf, and you want to do it with a sterile instrument. Some people use blowtorches with clippers, but yeah, razor blades are easier. The Q-tips and alcohol, as we said, and the plastic water jugs for water. And you do, in the summer, you do a lot of filling of your humidity trays because, like, yeah, the water evaporates like crazy. Then you have stakes of different sizes. These they're sitting in here are the clips. I did like had been used, so I soaked them in like about 1/10 bleach and the rest water to kill any germs, because there is, things can spread easily among orchids. Oh, that's the end. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Wait, how did I do that? Okay, so any other questions?
At this point, if you want to ask any question, you can unmute yourself maybe. Any last questions? I think we went through everything that was in the chat as we were doing the talk. Questions, comments?
Yeah.
Anyone?
Really, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. Yes, Shoshana.
So I'd like to know more about your emotional attachment to orchids. Like, I mean, I love roses. And so I'm just wondering what draws you to the orchids and, compared to, let's say, other flowers.
I was thinking about that earlier a little bit. So, when I go to greenhouses, I always love to look at the orchids and, and just to kind of, stare at them and just, appreciate them, because I just thought they were so beautiful and they're so diverse. And that's
Michelle,
yeah.
You do a great job growing orchids, and you grow a variety of orchids. Maybe could you pan around with your camera just to show people behind you? You have so many orchids right there.
Yeah, mostly I showed. I mean, I can.
But thank you so much, because
Oh, wow.
you really shared a lot of wonderful information.
You're welcome. Yeah, Martha comes with me to the Central Jersey Orchid Society. So we'd love to have more people. Anything else?
I have a question. So this is, these are all Trader Joe's originals that have all rebloomed.
Oh, great, great.
They're in a western window. I don't know what I'm doing right, but this one bloomed lower and then an upper stem.
Yeah.
The flowers have already died. So do I cut this stem off?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just cut it at the base?
Yeah, or a little above the base. Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. So they work a lot at, getting them from the store, grocery stores.
I don't know what I did right, but I have beautiful blooms.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the second time.
Yeah, right on. Good.
Michelle,
Thank you for,
do all the orchids require so much attention, or are there some that you can kind of just have and not really do much?
Well, I think, if you just have a few, I don't know, Ellen, do you ever fertilize yours?
I do. I have upstairs, I have a window that's a western exposure, a big window. So I keep them up there. I feed them periodically. Plus I've done the ice. I kind of alternate the way I water them. I did try replanting some and it was a disaster. So I've kept them in their original pots, but so far, I don't know what I'm doing right, but I've been lucky.
Yeah.
And they've rebloomed. This is the fifth reblooms of five plants that I've had.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're all from Trader Joe's.
Okay.
Michelle, I just want to say thank you for the little watering tips. I'm very lucky because when we've bought the orchids and they haven't looked so good after a while, I have someone who takes them and nurses them until they're ready to bloom again, and then I get them back. Oh, how nice.
Perfect.
Benign neglect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? I'm going to mute everyone and let's give Michelle a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank
Yes,
you.
bye.
Thanks, Melissa.
Michelle.
Okay, good night.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night.